What's up, YouTube family? This is Mike G, and you are back on the other side. I'm bringing you an interview tonight with someone who I consider an icon in the business. He is the 1999 Outstanding Journalist of the Year award winner by the Nevada Press Association, the 2007 Nat Fleischer Award for Excellence winner in boxing journalism, and the 2014 Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame inductee. Kevin Iole, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Michael. Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. I'm honored, and I hope the people that watch this get something out of it, sir. If there's anyone that has a plethora of knowledge on the sport and journalism and covering it, it is you. I kind of want to start out with, what did you get into first? Did you want to be a journalist first, or was it combat sports that drew you?
No, I wanted to be a journalist. So I grew up in the 70s. I went to high school in the 70s, and Watergate was going on
Mm-hmm.
back then. So I grew up a sports fan. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My dad was a big sports fan, and we loved all sports. The only sport that neither of us were big on were auto racing and soccer, but we were big on every other sport. My dad fought when he was in the Army.
Okay.
And I just love like boxing right from the beginning. Like when I was a kid, I remember, watching fights, at
Mm-hmm.
my earliest age. My dad actually, one of my distinctions I always like to say is that I actually saw Sugar Ray Robinson fight in person because my
Wow.
dad, would turn, they did, I don't think they knew it at the time, but Sugar Ray Robinson's final fight was in Pittsburgh. And
Okay.
my father brought me to the fight that year. So I saw Sugar Ray Robinson fight live against Joey Giardello and his final fight, as it turned out. So I got to see basically in person Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearn, Roberto Duran, Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao. So I saw all those great welterweights,
Wow.
so that, although one of them, I think I was 4 or 5 years old. So
Um, when did you first realize that becoming a journalist was possible for you?
I was in high school, and when I was younger, hey, I wanted to pitch for the Pirates or play quarterback for the Steelers, right? That
Sure.
was what I wanted to do, and then I realized, what, you pretty much suck, and so you're not going to be doing that. So, so do something else. And I always loved to write. I competed in the National Spelling Bee a couple times. I think when I was in either fifth and sixth grade or sixth and seventh grade, but I was in the National Spelling Bee twice. Writing was something that was always fun for me. And as I mentioned earlier, Watergate was going on, and that was at a time, unlike now where journalists are held in low esteem and there's a lot of
Sure.
distrust of the press and everything. At that time, I mean, journalists had rooted out corruption in the White House, and this major scandal all came because of reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And people got to see kind of what was actually going on behind the scenes in their government, and that was really inspiring to me. And so I decided I wanted to be a sports writer. Combat sports, I love combat sports, but I kind of lucked into combat sports coverage. I got a full-time job at a small paper in Pittsburgh while I was still in college.
Okay.
And I mostly worked on, when I first started there, I mostly worked on the desk taking calls and writing high school sports, right? But there was a monthly boxing card at a Howard Johnson's hotel that was there. And I just said, hey, can I go cover this? And I go, who cares? If you want to cover it, go ahead. So I used to cover that boxing card every month, and there were fighters that nobody ever heard of, probably before or since.
Right.
And then out of nowhere in 1980, was it 80 or 81, Pittsburgh got a heavyweight title fight. Larry Holmes fought Ronaldo Snipes. And I never anticipated going because, I'm the junior person on staff. And to me, the heavyweight championship of the world was a big thing.
Sure.
But my boss said, yeah, of course you're going. You've been writing about boxing for us, so of course you're going to go to the fight. So that was my first really big fight, Larry Holmes and Ronaldo Snipes. That fight was on ABC. Howard Cosell, called that fight, and Larry Holmes got knocked down in that fight, so we
Yeah.
almost had the change hands. So that's kind of how things broke combat sports wise for me.
Okay. this is kind of a jump forward. How different is covering the sport of boxing or MMA today different than at the beginning of your career? Obviously, it's grown. The ability to cover fighters and cover fights, how has that changed?
Well, I mean, there's some better, some worse, right? So one of the things that I think is worse now is everybody is worried about the scoop and being the first one to break. And you hear reporters, I was the one that had that, and this person, had it at 6'11", and this person had it at 6'12", and they're arguing over who had the story first. For much of my career, you had to wait till the next day's paper came out, and
Hmm.
and so you had what you thought might be a scoop, and you wrote your story and you posted it, and then you had to wait you had to make sure the 11 o'clock news did not have it,
Hmm.
have it get through there, and then have it come up in the paper the next morning, and then check around, make sure nobody else actually had the story. And so, because of that, I think, people weren't as worried about the immediacy of getting a scoop, and things were more accurate. Because I think what
Hmm.
happens now is, the old saying, Michael, that you heard, haste makes waste. And,
Yes, sir.
we all do it. Everybody wants to get that scoop out, and they want to say, hey, so and so is headlining UFC 300, or so and so is headlining the big boxing card at T-Mobile Arena, and everybody wants to be the first one to get
Hmm.
that out and have everybody else credit them. And sometimes things don't go right. I've been guilty of that. Everybody who has ever done journalism has been guilty of that. But when that wasn't possible, that forced you to be more thorough and to double check and triple check. And so that is a way that it's worse now. It's better because you have more access to information. And so you learn things about fighters that maybe you would have never known before, right? And the
Hmm.
fighters themselves they can express part. And so you can interview fighters, and you have a little bit of background about going into the interview. Like, you're not just flying blind all the time.
Sure.
Back sometimes, I'd say, hey, I want to interview, Mike Tyson back when he was in his first go round. There was no internet. And people would say, well, here's a couple things about Mike you may want to know. And, I could ask that or not ask that.
Hmm.
But, you know, there wasn't a lot of information that was readily accessible available. Now I can sit here. I'm interviewing Arnold Allen tomorrow he's fighting on UFC 304, and I'm going to sit there, and while I'm waiting for him to hop on my interview, I'm going to be reading everything that's been written about Arnold Allen in the last, however period of time, or talked about him. And so all that information is there. So that makes it better. So, like, things have changed, some things for the better,
Sure.
some things for the worse.
What is your favorite boxing match of all time?
I mean, Ollie Frazier won.
Okay.
One of the great fights of all time, not the greatest fight in my opinion, but I think the biggest. You can make an argument that's the biggest sports event ever. If you go back and if you read anything about what was written
Hmm.
in that time, Ali. It's impossible now for somebody who was not around in the '60s and the '70s to understand just how big Muhammad Ali was. Take Michael Jordan and add LeBron James and multiply by Kobe Bryant, and you
Hmm.
know and take Tom Brady and add Patrick Mahomes. You've got half of what Muhammad Ali was, right, at
Hmm.
his peak. And that fight, was the biggest sporting event in boxing history for sure, in combat sports
Hmm.
history for sure, and in my opinion, probably the biggest sporting event ever.
Yeah.
And so it was a great fight. It had an upset. Joe Frazier won the fight, a dramatic ending.
Hmm.
Ali gets knocked down in the 15th round with one of the great left hooks of all time. You know, there was everything in it. Unbelievable rivalry. Both guys in their primes.
Hmm.
Both had a legitimate claim to the heavyweight title. There was no interim title. There was no. They both had claims to it. So to me, that event, stands above everything else.
Okay. Um, you have watched, and I'm sure you've heard everyone talk in recent years about how uh, the UFC is passing boxing by, and boxing's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. Everybody has their opinion why. What do you think the main reason for that is?
Well, boxing has been on a downhill spiral since the 1960s, right? If you go prior to the 1960s, I think the biggest sports in the United States would have been maybe in this order, baseball, horse racing, boxing, and college football. Those are
Yeah.
the four. NFL wasn't very big. NBA wasn't very big. When I was in high school, I graduated high school in 1977. The NBA playoff games were on tape delay after the news. So at 11:30 at night, you could watch the NBA playoff game, right? You don't have to worry about knowing, you just had to make sure you get the sports segment at 11 o'clock.
Right.
Of course, now the NBA is massive, right? It's,
Mm-hmm.
it's this huge league. But boxing, most of the wounds were self-inflicted, and it got worse and worse and worse, and it just kept narrowing down to this, really the hardcore fan base is very small in boxing, right? And I think, there's been a number of reasons for that, but the biggest reason is that the promoters do not put the best guys against each other on a regular basis. And number two to that, they don't make even matchups on a regular basis.
Yeah.
If you look at what the UFC does, you're rarely going to see a fight card where they have a 5-1 underdog. On boxing, you may see a card that never has a 5-1 underdog because everything's higher,
Right.
and they have these, minus 1,400, minus 1,500, these nutty prices where, the odds are astronomical. People want to see the best in the world compete against each other. That's why the Super Bowl is so big. And that's why UFC succeeds, because they make, hey, over the years, you take the 30 years, 31 years the UFC has been in existence, there have been a handful of fights that we might have wanted to see that you say, I wanted to see Randy Couture fight Fedor. I want to see Brock Lesnar fight Fedor.
GSP and Anderson Silva.
There might have been a couple other ones, but for the most part, they make those fights. They get the fight the fans want to see made. And then the other fights on the show are always evenly matched going in. You look at it and you go, I don't know who's going to win this fight. That's what boxing, I think if boxing did nothing else but that would make a huge difference for it.
Do you think that will happen?
No. I mean, I think, we're seeing a little bit of it. But boxing people are selfish, and they don't care about the industry as a whole. And they care about their own little fiefdom. And, maybe Dana White doesn't care about the industry as a whole. But his company accounts for such a big percentage of MMA that was good for UFC is good for MMA. But like in boxing, if Top Rank can have a big night, they don't care if Golden Boy next week has a bomb, or if Matchroom has a big night, they don't care if DeBella Entertainment has a bomb, right?
Right.
And I think boxing promoters should be looking to build the industry up and lift the entire industry, and they should celebrate each other's successes, and they should work together to eliminate some of the craziness that goes on, the strip championships and all these nutty mandatories that, who cares about some of the, these fights and the machinations that go on. I think if the people in boxing work together better, it would be, the sport would be better off.
Almost like boxing's more selfish and worried about right now rather than down the road and in the future.
Yeah, they're looking, Mike. They're looking to make a big score, right? That on one given night, they're not looking to have a sustainable business. I think if you ask any promoter, they're not idiots, and you said, "Hey, do you want to have a sustainable business where you're constantly making money and growing?"
Sure.
They'll say yes, but they don't want to actually take the steps to do that. That becomes the problem. Whereas, in MMA, people do that. That's the way the business is built, and that's the way the sport is built. And I think it helps the sport as a whole.
Do you think I've heard Dana say many times that he believes that one day MMA will be the biggest sport in the world. Do you how much of that do you think is talk, and how much of that do you think could be a reality?
I mean, I think he believes that. Do I believe that that's going to be? No. But do I think MMA, I think soccer is always going to be, the best sport, not the best sport. I don't even like soccer. So I didn't mean to say best. Believe me, the biggest sport in the world, right? I mean, kids can go out and play soccer, and, not everybody wants to fight, but everybody kick a ball and most of the kids can run around and everything. So I think soccer, and it's ingrained in the culture so much in all places around the world. But I think MMA is going to get bigger than it is right now, right? I mean, like I think of where MMA is now, and it's just mind blowing where it was
is.
20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I covered it, and people were like ripping me for like now I'm the one thing I agree with Dana White on is like the criticism of Power Slap.
Mm-hmm.
I'm covering Power Slap a little bit because I'm covering what some of my readership wants to see. And I'm hearing a lot of the same things that was when we first started covering MMA. I covered boxing where there was 7 fighters who died in fights that I was at ringside.
Oh.
And that's awful, right? It's the worst, the worst thing that could ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have horrible memories from some of those fights, and I don't want to be in that again. And if I thought that was what Power Slap was going to be, I wouldn't be covering that. And I didn't cover the first ones because I thought that's what it was, and then I learned a little bit more about it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I understand it's not everybody's thing, and it if Dana White were talking to you right now, he would tell you that I said, where is the sport in this? I asked that question many times. Where's the sport in you having to put your hands behind your back and stick your chin out?
Right.
So it may not be the sport for everybody, but I kind of feel like from the safety standpoint that it is not as bad as portrayed. But so I think, that when you look at it, right, MMA just, has so many of the elements right.
Mm-hmm.
And they have people looking out for the sport that I think it's, going to be better.
Back to boxing for a second. Who, if you could have interviewed any boxer alive in their prime during your time covering the sport that you never got an opportunity to, who would that be?
Well, Ali, of course. I mean, I talked to Ali after his career was over. So I started covering boxing in '79,
Right.
and his last fight was 1980.
Okay.
And so I never covered one of his fights in person. I've spoken to him afterwards and met him on a number of occasions, but never when he was in his prime and fighting. And I mean, I've heard stories from the people who came before me and about what he was like to cover. And one of the gentlemen here in Las Vegas, who was a casino host, now retired, he met Muhammad Ali at the Olympics in Rome in 1960. His name is Gene Kilroy. Eventually became his business manager and one of his closest friends his entire life. And, I occasionally have lunch with Gene, and we talk, about Ali all the time. And just to, so if I could say I could go back in time and do anything other than, going back and talk to my mother, my father, and my brother and telling them that I love them, interviewing Muhammad Ali would be in his prime would be the one thing I'd want to do.
Okay. Muhammad Ali in his prime versus Tyson in his prime.
Not even a fight. Ali, not even a fight.
It just float around the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, even Tyson would admit that. I mean, if you look like Tyson, so I don't want people to get this wrong. I am not saying Tyson wasn't a great fighter. Tyson was,
sure,
but Tyson lost most of his most significant fights, right? And he lost twice to Holyfield. He lost to Lennox Lewis.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at his career and the most significant fights he was in, he lost. And his prime, really, where he was elite, was short. His biggest win, of course, was Michael Spinks, where he, he knocked out Michael Spinks in 91 seconds. But, I think Ali was just such a great boxer, had such a great chin, and the way he fought that I think, especially, maybe the mid 70s on version of Ali would have lost to Tyson. But the 1967 version of Ali, I think Tyson would have really struggled with him.
Right. Pulled pork or brisket?
Ha ha ha. Well, I guess I would eat pulled pork. I got some in the refrigerator, and I would not turn down a meal with both, especially with good barbecue sauce. But I guess pulled pork would be a good one.
Do you have some good barbecue in Vegas?
Oh, there's a lot of good barbecue here in Vegas. The one great thing about living in Vegas is pretty much anything you want is here.
Mm-hmm.
The one shortcoming we used to have for years was Major League Sports, and now we have the NFL and we have NHL.
Right.
Soon to have Major League Baseball, and they're building a $2 billion complex. It may end up being $5 billion by the time it's done, just down on Las Vegas Boulevard, and that's being built with the idea and the promise of having an expansion NBA team there. So eventually, we're going to have all four of the the big four major sports. So that was the one weakness Las Vegas had. Now we've hosted the Super Bowl. We're going to have the Final Four in a few years. Had the NFL draft, NHL draft. Blah 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 blah. Great restaurants in this city. So you want barbecue? There's barbecue restaurants. You want steak? There's steak restaurants. And you want fancy food with names that we can't pronounce? They have that too here.
If you're ever in Fayetteville, Arkansas, Kevin, hook me up or look me up. I work at a world champion barbecue restaurant, multiple time world champion. I'd love to hook you up with some brisket or pulled pork.
Sounds like a good one there.
Who has given you your most enjoyable interview? If you had to pick your favorite interview.
That's an interesting one, because I don't know. I could pick one interview out and say, at least thinking off the top of my head, wow, this was my best interview. I've had a great relationship with Floyd Mayweather over the years. I covered the vast majority of his fights in person, had a lot of really good interviews and compelling talks with him. So Floyd Mayweather certainly would be up there. Dana White, would certainly be up there. Bob Arum, the head of Top Rank, just incredible. With some of the stuff. Another guy that people might be surprised I'll mention is David Tua. David Tua fought for the heavyweight title, and I got to know David. Dan Goosen, his promoter, had him in Vegas a lot. Kevin Barry was training David at the time. Kevin Barry lived here in Vegas. David trained here, fought here. I got to know him. I did a diary with him before he fought Lennox Lewis. So we actually did the diary together. A lot of these diaries are ghostwritten, and the fighter or the athlete is not involved. But the David Tua diary that I did for the Las Vegas Review-Journal before he fought Lennox Lewis, I would go to his house the day before, at the end of the day, and talk to him about what we were going to write in the next day's paper. And after the weigh-in, I went to his house, and it was a crazy scene. There was all these. His place where he was staying was about 20 miles from the Strip, way up in a remote area in the mountains in Las Vegas, where he could run Mount Charleston. And they had exotic animals stayed at that place, and so unfortunately, there was a tiger that I have a picture of right back there. And I'm petting this tiger. The tiger mauled his trainer and killed it a few months after the Lewis Tyson fight. Excuse me, it was Tua fight. But there was a kangaroo, there was lions, there was tigers. But I was doing my final interview with David for the diary, the final entry of the diary, and a little chimpanzee comes in the room and jumps up on the back of the couch, and we were sitting on an L-shaped sofa, and the chimp sat literally on top of my head. And I'm looking like this, and David goes, "Come on, let's go," and he went. I'm sitting there interviewing him with a chimpanzee sitting on top of my head.
I can't imagine that. What is your biggest regret in life?
I don't have any regrets. I'm happy. I'm happy with my life. I'm happy, with what I have done. I made mistakes. I've made some mistakes along the way. I like to think I learned from them. And so I don't live life with regrets. I get upset in the moment when I make a mistake, and then I try to learn from it. And I say, okay. Absolutely. don't make that event mistake again. And so I don't have any regrets. I mean, I'm disappointed that I got laid off at Yahoo. Uh, so late in my career. And I'm in my mid 60s now, and to not be able to retire when I wanted on my terms, was disappointing. But it led me to a venture where I started KevinIole.com.
Hmm.
As we record this, today is my 6-month anniversary.
I
And
like that. Yeah.
so and I'm proud of that, and my traffic
Hmm.
is way up, and I've done a lot of things, and I've got things in the works now that are going to make it even better. And so, had I not gotten laid off, I would have, been still doing the same thing at Yahoo. And now, I got this opportunity to create my own vision,
Hmm.
and um, and I'm proud of what I've done, and I think it's going to get better.
I do too. If you hadn't gone into journalism, what would you have done in
You
a
know, I,
different life?
I've been a lawyer. I think
Right.
that if you can't tell, I like to talk, and I've loved to read. So I think those two things. I have a whole bunch of books here, and I have a room in there with nothing but bookcases filled with books, and I have books in storage, and I love books. And so I think had I not become a journalist, I would have been an attorney.
How did you ever cover any Pride events?
Yes, I covered a couple of Pride events, a couple of them in person. I covered, I want to say Pride 31 and 32, or 32 and 33. I don't remember the numbers, but I did cover those. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know. Like any hardcore fan. Pride was awesome. Pride never die. Are there any more fighters left on contract in the UFC who fought in Pride? Nick
Okay.
Diaz, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, Diaz, of course, would be one. Let's see, Robbie Lawler's not fighting.
Yeah.
I cannot think of anybody off the top of my head. So, when did Pride fall? 2007.
Hmm.
It'd have to be somebody that's still fighting 17 years later.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so yeah, not many.
Not too many. Let's see here. What is the most rewarding thing about being a journalist?
You know, I mentioned earlier that I covered 7 fighters who died,
Hmm.
including I was working at the Las Vegas Review Journal in 2005. There was one fighter who died in a fight in August, and then another fighter who died in a fight in September. So I had 2 deaths in back-to-back months. The first fighter, I didn't even think anything of it. He got knocked out. He actually got knocked out of the ring, and a reporter was sitting next to me. We were both on the ring apron, and he came out underneath the ropes, and he would have fallen right on my laptop. And we put our hands up, and we kept him from hitting the floor. His name was Martin Sanchez, and he rolled back under the ropes, took a knee, and the referee was Kenny Bayless,
Hmm.
who will, of course, one day be in the Hall of Fame as one of the great refs. And Kenny was given him the count, and Martin sat there on one knee. Now, Martin didn't speak English, but Martin was on one knee, and he's watching Kenny count, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And as Kenny gets to 10, Martin just stayed down. As soon as Kenny said 10 and waves his hand, Martin popped up. So he had had enough. Basically, tapped out, I guess would be a way of saying it. He took the count, gets up, and Joe Martinez, who still doing ring announcing today, was the ring announcer that night. And as Martin walked out of the ring, Joe Martinez said, "Hey, how about a hand for Martin Sanchez, who fought a great fight?" And Martin blows kisses to the crowd like that. Then he remembers that Dave and I saved him from hitting the floor. And he turned around and he pointed at us, and he goes like this and gives us the thumbs up. I went home that night. The next morning, one of the PR guys called, said, "Do you remember that fighter who almost fell on you?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "He collapsed in a locker room after you left, was sent into emergency brain surgery, and he died." Then Alexander Johnson passes away. I was in the hospital the next morning, Sunday morning after the fight. Jesus Chavez beat him. Chavez won the world title from Johnson.
Hmm.
His father was the trainer. We're standing in the emergency room, and his son is in a room. We're not allowed in the room, and they're working on him. And Chavez walks in. I see Chavez come in, this emotional moment, and they hugged each other. And Chavez was crying and saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson." And Bill Johnson, who was Levander's father, said, "Champ, you did your job," and he was just patting him on the back and trying to encourage him. A couple of days later, Levander unfortunately passed. I decided as a result of that, I had seen enough of death in boxing. I wrote a series, I think it was either 10 or 12, I can't remember, of articles of health and safety that appeared. And the Nevada Athletic Commission adopted, I think, all but one of my suggestions that I said that they should do. And so you talk about what I made a tangible difference in the lives of a lot of future fighters because I had written this and encouraged, a look. So people a lot smarter than me, got involved in it
Right.
and looking at it. And I think, I'd be lying to you to say, the fight game is 100% safe. It is not. But it is safer, and we see far few frequencies of death in the ring or death in a cage. And I haven't been many in an octagon or not in the octagon, and very few in a cage fight. But and I feel like I played a small part because of that series of articles that I read.
That's awesome. Uh, I hope you've never been asked this next question before. I have a guilty pleasure of a vice, if you call it. If it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I wake up and there is honey roasted peanut butter anywhere in the house, I'm going to eat the whole jar. What is your guilty pleasure that maybe people don't know about?
Oh, just any kind of sweet. I have a unbelievable
Sweets.
sweet tooth. If it is sweet, forget about it. I'm in. So
Is
that
the
that
middle of the night the worst?
that's why I got that. Yeah. So I've been right now. I'm on a jelly bean kick. So
Okay.
I've been getting 3 flavors of Jelly Belly jelly beans. My favorite by far is bubble gum, and then
Okay.
green apple and very cherry. So I've been, that's my kind of flavor of the month for a moment. But if it's sweet, I like it.
Okay. That's great. Um, what do you have going on in your life? You talked about KevinIole.com. What else do you have going on in your life outside of covering combat sports and being the most amazing journalist in all of sports?
I'm not sure about that, but in fact, I know that's not true. But
My opinion, sir.
thank you. I appreciate that. I'm at a stage in my life where I'm thinking of what's going to come next, right? I have my YouTube channel. I'm making improvements to my YouTube channel that you're gonna probably see over the next couple of weeks. They're going to be, I think, amazing and take my YouTube channel to the next level. Really looking forward to having that hit and go out and make it a lot more professional video production. I haven't been happy with what I've done in that regard. So, my short-term goals are just to, make my site better and better, keep my traffic, going like that. But away from it, I'm doing the everyday, thing of life, paying the bills, trying to think about my retirement. I love working, and I love doing this. And there's days, where you're frustrated. You thought you were going to get a scoop and you don't get it. Somebody else gets it, and or you didn't get an interview that you thought you were going to get. You're mad. I'm done with this, and I'm not going to do it. But for me to have done, like, I love to write, I love to talk, I love to watch sports, and that's what I've done my whole life, right? I mean, so how do I have any bitch, right? I don't, life has, right?
Yeah.
And I think of all the events that I covered, and sometimes it's easy to forget, and I've had people, oh my God, I wish I was you, and I wish I got to do what you did, and everything, and so I think about it sometimes like, oh, every one of my Saturday nights I'm at a fight, and I'm not doing this with my friend or doing that, there. But then I think, how many people would want to be me sitting 10 feet away from the ring? And I remember, Tim Dahlberg from the Associated Press. He's a Hall of Famer, And Tim was one of my great, or is one of my great friends, a tremendous reporter, tremendous boxing writer. We were covering the Mayweather Pacquiao fight together. You remember how big that fight was and
Yeah.
how talk there was for years of that fight getting made. And we sat there, and we both had goosebumps as we were sitting there before the fight started. And we said, "This is like our Ali Frazier." We were too
Hmm.
young to cover Ali Frazier then, but that was the fight, Mayweather Pacquiao. And I was sitting there, and if I would have, taken a half a step forward, I could have slapped the ring. And that's how close we were to the ring. And the
Wow.
seats were going, I mean, the scalping and the amount of money those seats were going for. And I remember looking directly across the ring from me and sitting one seat over, would have been to my right, was Donald Trump and Melania,
Hmm.
right? Who knew, a little over a year later, he'd be elected president of the United States.
Right.
And there was all those A-list celebrities, and it was crazy night. And I was a guy that had covered boxing for 30, almost 35, almost 40 years at that point. And I'm like, holy shit, look at what it was incredible. And that, I think whenever I think of, hey, I wish I had my Saturday night free or whatever, I think back to those moments. Like, yeah, I did all right.
Yeah. Do you think we will see Connor in the octagon again?
No. I wrote a column on that on my site. I think Connor, here's my take on Connor. Connor loves to fight. And I
Hmm.
think, if he could fight you or me tomorrow, he would fight.
Sure.
The problem is it's going to take a little more training to fight somebody in the UFC, a Michael Chandler or
Yeah.
whoever else, than to beat up you and me. And I think Connor loves the attention that being, Conor McGregor gives him. And so there's a press conference and the crowd's going crazy. He loves that. He loves all the stuff that goes with fighting except for one thing, training. I don't
Yeah.
think he wants to train anymore. He's making so much money and he can do whatever he wants to do with his life. And does he want to go out there and, run, 8-10 miles a day? And does all the calisthenics that you do and all the weightlifting and getting punched and kicked and elbowed every
Yeah.
day, and your body takes a beating. And I don't think he wants to do that anymore. And he probably in his conscious doesn't realize it. He knows how much he loves to fight. And if you could walk into the ring and fight without training, then I guarantee you he'd be back tomorrow.
Hmm.
But you have to train to beat those top guys, and I don't think that he has that motivation anymore. The old Marvin Hagler. It's difficult to run at 4 a.m. when you're sleeping on silk sheets.
Yeah. Speaking of what you just said, Hagler Hearns round one, greatest round in boxing history.
Well, I'll tell you that is right up there. The Corrales Castillo round 10,
Okay. Yeah.
one. That was the dramatic. Corrales goes down twice, and and then he comes back, and Castillo gets
Hmm.
knocked out. Who saw that coming? But Corrales, Hagler and Hearns, what an all-time classic.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some other great rounds that are out there, but for the first round of a huge middleweight title fight, for them to come out and go at it the way they did,
I could watch that twice a week forever.
I mean, that's one of my favorites of all. That is one of my three favorites. Pryor Arguello won Ali Frazier 3 at the Thrill in Manila. And that fight, like I really have, I throw Corrales Castillo in there as well. But those first three that I mentioned, it's just I think were special fights. And to be able to watch that fight was wild.
Hmm. I think just to throw my opinion in there, I think my favorite fight ever. I can't remember if it was the first one or the second one. Barrera Morales.
Well,
That
they
is
fought,
incredible.
yeah, fought 3 times, and they were
Three times.
four times, yeah. And I covered all 4 of those fights, and they were fantastic fights. Yeah, the first fight was really good. I thought the first fight was outstanding. The second fight was very good, and the other fights were excellent. So you're probably remembering one.
Okay. Yeah, they both knocked each other down. It was it seems like if I remember right, Morales was the underdog, not really expected to do as well as he did. Is that right?
You
Or was
know,
it the other way around? Barrera was the older guy.
they were pretty evenly matched, and there was a huge rivalry between them. Morales was undefeated. He had been with Top Rank and
Okay.
came up and was undefeated. Barrera had lost to Junior Jones and whatnot. But I think that both guys were considered elite at that time. But woof, that they put on some fights.
Kevin, I only have one question left for you, sir. As someone who has lived what I consider an amazing life, done well, hasn't been locked up, hasn't been to rehab, hasn't had to start their life over out of their car 4 or 5 times, what what message can you give to people that maybe struggle with just making bad decisions? People that have a hard time looking past today, people who struggle with everyday life. What sort of message do you have about not giving up?
Well, I think it's everybody has problems, even the richest person in the world.
Sure.
Uh, whatever is important to you. If it's having a beautiful spouse, sexy spouse, beautiful spouse, rich, whatever is important to you. Even people that have all that have problems, and it's how you deal with your problems and realize that tomorrow is going to be a better day.
Mhm.
And the other thing I would say. There's a lot of people that will be willing to help you, but God helps those who help themselves. And take the first step and try to get yourself. And if your dream is to be a sports writer and cover MMA and boxing like I've done, reach out to somebody. Start a you know what? It's a lot easier today to do what I do because you can get a domain name, you can get a blog, you can start for free. And I couldn't do that, right? You can start for free and do it and gain practical experience.
Mhm.
And so whatever it is, if you're suffering, if you're in a bad spot, believe that tomorrow's going to be a better day and try to help yourself, because if you help yourself, there's going to be 10 times as many people willing to help you if you try to help yourself.
I agree with that 100%. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on tonight. As I'm sure you've heard me say a million times, it is an absolute honor to know you, to talk to you. I will forever be grateful that you responded to that first message on Facebook. Still shocked that you did. Thank you again.
You're
Um,
welcome. Thank you for having me.
I will. I will talk to you again soon. As I say in all my interviews, by now I consider you a friend. I hope you consider me a friend. Um,
Absolutely.
Maybe one of these days we can message back and forth about Jake Paul.
Well, God bless, man. I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Whenever I get this uploaded, I'll send over a copy to you.
Sounds great.
Thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too.